apparently saying that putting a content warning about strobing lights does not make the content accessible is a controversial thing to say. Let's get into it. I'm only going to focus on the strobing light example because this can get more complicated once we get into subjects that involve, say, PTSD. So there were many people that disagreed that putting up this content warning did not make it accessible, but that's like saying that putting up a sign that says this building has no wheelchair access would make that building accessible. And then there were others that said, duh, that's common knowledge. Anyway, I'm not a legal expert, but there are laws that say that any business has to have accessibility in their business features. So if your business involves providing content, technically speaking, it is federal law for you to provide accessible versions within reason. So obviously, if you're making a video game that uses strobing as a part of the gameplay, where without the strobing, the game cannot be played, that would be an exception to the law. Or if you're someone who creates videos about concerts and the concerts have strobing lights, you can't really remove that. Again, there are exceptions. But you do have to provide a warning at the beginning of the video that is long enough and large enough for people to see. And I'll get into some of the tips for making the content more accessible here in a minute. A lot of the content out there with strobing lights, even major video games, movies, TV shows, do not have accessible alternatives or even accessible features allowing for access to the content. I'm anticipating, as the advocacy around disability continues to grow, that we are going to see more and more lawsuits around these big companies not providing accessible content. And it is already happening. In a lot of cases, there is no excuse for not having accessible options, especially when we see that there are a number of video games, movies, and other content that has deliberately made accessible versions. Many video games give you the option to turn off strobing effects in the game. Some have even gone beyond that. There are a few games that offer an arachnophobia mode where the game changes spiders to something else, like kittens or just a block of text. This isn't that difficult of a programming feature and could be applied beyond spiders. These companies are making creative choices that are proving that it is possible, and not only possible, but makes it more profitable because you have a much wider audience. I bet you would be surprised what percentage of the population has some form of light sensitivity when it comes to flashing, well beyond just photosensitive epilepsy. Some estimates put people with light sensitivities at 20% of the population, and one survey found that 69% of ADHD people have some sort of light sensitivity. So what if you're making content and it has to have strobing effects? How can you make it accessible or more accessible? If the content absolutely has to have strobing, indicate at the beginning of the video the time codes at which the strobing occurs, along with the warning. The time code is important to make your video mostly accessible apart from those portions. If you want to go a step further, you can also add a warning 10 seconds before the portion of the content that has strobing with a 10-second countdown, indicating that flashing lights are about to happen and what time code they need to advance to skip. But that'll take away from everyone's experience with those warnings popping up. You're right. So best practice, in my opinion, is to make an alternate version. The first version would start with the photosensitivity warning and direct people to where they can access the video that doesn't have strobes. So if your movie has a party scene, for example, shoot it twice, one without strobes. Ultimately, I believe that the large platforms, including social media platforms, should build this kind of accessibility into the apps, so that the users like you and me don't have to worry as much about it. And the way I would like to see this happen is if you're a photosensitive viewer, you can indicate it to the app, and the app should automatically flag photosensitive content and then skip those portions of the content for you or at least have some sort of warning pop up that it's coming up and what time code to go to. But at the same time, content creators from small to major corporations need to provide accessible alternatives to what we create. Again, within reason. Like, we are creatives. Why can't we get creative about being accessible for more people? Stop whining about more people wanting to see your content. There are always going to be exceptions, but our default should be making everything as accessible as we can. Finally, I am really disgusted at the amount of people who are arguing that accessibility is not really important and that disabled people just shouldn't be able to enjoy the things that everyone else can. Like, seriously? Y'all sound like wannabe billionaires. Gross.